It's an honor for me to be with you all today. As Salwan has clearly stated, I have no musical ability at all. But I thought we could just explore this, what the silence is really about, because it's an essential part of music, right? There's sound, and then there's something you can almost say, that from which sound arises, and we could call that silence. So what I'd like to do first is just take a few minutes and just relax into our bodies. And I find this is a useful way to get in touch with something within ourselves without trying to do it mentally or conceptually. So as we're all just sitting here in a quiet room, you know, one of the things that we can notice is that we're breathing. This is good. You know, breath is really interesting because it's one of the functions of the body that can either be done consciously or left to run on automatic pilot, you could say. For right now, for this purpose, we can just notice that the breath is happening, you know, without trying to make it be any particular way. You can just notice that the body knows how to do that already. And we can allow it to do that, you know, without trying to improve it or do it right or so as we're just noticing that the breath is happening, we can just check in with just the what the body is doing with that. Just how maybe the belly's moving a bit, maybe the chest is moving. And we can feel the air moving in and out of our nose. You can notice that maybe on the in-breath it's a little bit cooler, the out-breath a little bit warmer. This is just the body doing what it knows how to do. So we might also notice that the breath is moving out into the room on the exhalation, moves into our body on the inhalation. So we can just notice that relationship with the room, right, with our immediate surroundings. Just that sense of connectedness with our immediate environment. And while we're noticing the environment, we might notice, let's just say the sensation of the temperature of the room on our skin, maybe on our forehead. We can also notice that we're sitting on a chair and how that feels to the body, just to be supported in that way. So now we have several different sensations all happening, all non-conceptual, by the way. So we have the breath, sensation in the nose, movement of the belly, relationship of the breath in the room, sensation of the temperature in the room, and the sensation of being held, supported by the chair. So just, we don't have to interpret it or try to find any meaning in that, just the direct physical sensation of that, just to hold that within our perception. We can hold all of those sensations within our perception if we're not trying to focus on any one at the expense of the other, just more sort of a, you almost say like opening the aperture a little bit. letting all of those sensations just be noticed. Okay, we can also sense into the body. We'll just pick a body part. Let's take our right hand, and just without moving it or touching it, just try to sense into, I mean, is there not a sensation of a hand being there? You know, there's a sense of aliveness, sense of presence there at the end of our arm, you could say. Okay, so now we have another sensation. We have this internal sensation of, you know, maybe a little tingling in our hand, or just notice of sort of an internal sort of energetic movement in our hand. And if that's not noticeable, don't try to force it. But we also have these other inputs that are still happening: the sense of sitting in the chair, the breath, the room. Okay, so we're just opening the body itself in a very non-conceptual way to what is happening in this exact moment. Okay. You might also notice that there are thoughts maybe happening, like, where's this going? Whatever thought might be arising, but we can treat that too as another sort of, you'd say, the next object arising within this awareness. Just a simple noticing. So now there might be thought, might be the sensation in our hand, sense of sitting, breathing, say presence in the room. So all of these are just ways that our body is registering, you could say, phenomena that are happening in this moment. We haven't created anything. We haven't, you know, we're still sitting in the chair. We're still in a quiet room. But we can notice that within what we are, you know, we can identify these different sensations without having to control or manage or change or interpret any of them. And at this point, we can also become curious about what it is that notice is all about. You know, and we could call it, you know, awareness, or just simply noticing. We don't necessarily know exactly how that happens, but there is the object of perception, and then there's the noticing of it. So the noticing itself, we might sense into that it's actually silent. Our mind might be busy. You know, our attention may be drawn into these different physical sensations. But whatever it is that notices that is quiet. You could say it even is allowing all of those things to arise without even the intention to do so. It's just present for it. Right? So if we can touch into that simple noticing, simple awareness, um, thought may still be there, right? Thought may still, want to interpret it or judge it or try to make sense out of it. But again, we can see that as also, just the next arising within this noticing, within this awareness. We can let the mind sort of do that. And yet even that, even whatever objection or words or interpretation, that too is arising within just this simple awareness. So this awareness has, you could say it has some qualities. One is that it's quiet. It's, our mind may object or interpret, but the awareness itself is quiet already. The awareness itself is actually also willing to experience whatever is happening. Okay, so that's just a real easy pathway to come to a point of, you could say, inner silence, in a way that's non-conceptual. If we try to do it too directly to our mind, like, I just want to be quiet, make my mind stop, that doesn't work, right? It doesn't work because it's just another thought. So maybe our mind is busy. Maybe, our mind is being self-critical, judgmental about ourself, our singing, our last performance. The mind may do that. But this noticing is present even for that. It allows even that. So the silence that we're talking about is not dependent on the absence of thought. Okay. So sometimes I like to just sort of track silence back, because the way we usually think of it, silence is external silence. Like, I go for a walk in the morning before most people are up and about, and it's quiet outside. I sit in the backyard. I sit in a quiet room. I have my cup of tea. Everything's quiet. So that's nice. That's sort of an external silence that can be supportive of, a sense of, peace and quiet on the inside also. I think it's probably one of the really attractive things for many people about going out in nature. You walk down a path by yourself, it's quiet, right? There's lots of life happening. The trees are being trees and birds are being birds and the leaves on the ground, and all of that's happening, but it's happening without mental conceptualization. So that's comforting to most of us, just to have that kind of connection with an external silence, because it tends to remind us of something deeper within ourselves, something deeper than mind-based conceptualizations. So we can also look internally, right? We can say, well, I'm being silent, I'm not speaking, that sense of being silent. But in the meantime, if I've had a bad day, some problems really raging within, there can just be, a volcano of mental noise happening, even though I'm not speaking at all. So we can't really call that silence, even though nothing's coming out of our mouth, because there's this intensity of internal noise that's happening. One of the practices that's helpful in getting in touch with this internal silence is really to just stop and dedicate a little time. Although it's commonly known as meditation, that word often carries a lot of baggage. I prefer to call it just sitting, right? Just sit, see what happens. Okay, when we first do that, what we can encounter is, oh my gosh, the enormity of and the persistence and the annoying quality of all those thoughts that are going through my head. Right? So I'm not saying that thinking is bad. Obviously, a lot of things get accomplished by thinking. But when we really start to look at how, throughout just a 24-hour period, how much of that period our mind is focused on, sort of constructive thinking. That's great. That's a unique human ability, and not to be put down in any way. But we can also notice that there's an enormous, for almost all of us, there's an enormous amount of psychic energy that gets expended in repeating old stories, hoping for a better ending, or worrying about the future, or, trying to, resolve a interpersonal issue in a non-constructive way, trying to figure out who's to blame and who should have done what, etc. So all that kind of mental activity, by just sitting, with nothing else going on in the room, we have an opportunity to see that firsthand. A lot of times, just sitting quietly and watching what happens in our mind, it may be called looking within, but it's not really that. It's because we're actually looking at something. We're looking at the activity in our mind. So what can be really instructive about that is that the mind can be noisy. It can be raging on and on about something. And when we watch it, we can see that there's, not a sliver of silence between this thought and the next thought and the next thought. But we can also notice, just as we did at the beginning, that there is something that notices that thinking process. Whatever it is that notices that isn't a thought. It's something that is observing the thought, something that's aware of the thought. Thoughts may still go on, but when we begin to get in touch with this inner silence, inner awareness, we see that the thought is happening, you could say, within that field of silence. So even when the thought is happening, we can see, yes, thought is happening, can be really noisy, and yet there's something quiet that notices that. Our attention may tend to be drawn into that thought, but what's aware of it is already silent. So that's really useful to see, because it gives us a little separation between our thoughts that can often go on, be very self-critical, judgmental about ourselves and others. That may be, but then there's also something that's deeper than that, quieter than that, that's already present. So it's important to notice that we didn't create that. we didn't attain that. We just noticed. We gave ourselves the opportunity to just settle enough, very much like we did at the beginning, going in through the physicality of the body and coming to a place where we were just quiet enough that we could notice the phenomena and notice that there was something that was aware of that. So this quality of awareness has some very interesting similarities with silence. You know, they may, in fact, they may eventually be seen as just two words for the same thing. So in both cases, this awareness is already present. We may not notice it, very much like we may not always be aware of silence. You know, we've got the TV on, the dog's barking, you know, we might not always be saying yes, but there's underlying silence, you know, that may not happen. You know, our attention is often drawn to the most fascinating thing out there, which tends to be, you know, whatever, TV, you know, the next phone call, you know, walking to the coffee shop. What's on the evening news? You know, who texted me last? Those things are fascinating. So our attention can be pulled towards that. But we can notice even when that's happening, there is still this awareness of that happening. We may not be focused on that. We may not be paying any attention to it. Very much like if we're listening to music, we may be listening to the words and the notes, the tones, the meaning, not be paying any attention to the silence that's also present there. So in that sense, both silence and awareness are present, whether we pay attention to it or not. Right? But we can come back, if we're curious about it, we can come back to that often. Like, I don't know, we're just walking to the shop and, you know, we can just be curious and say, I wonder if that silence that we were talking about, I wonder if that is present now. And we can just check in. You know, I wonder if that awareness is present now. So when we begin to look frequently, we can see that it's not really ever absent, but often our attention is drawn towards the thingness of things, right? That's what our mind is more interested in, but not all that interested in silence, awareness, more interested in the content, right? In things that we can see and touch and taste and feel, get excited by, hope will happen. You know, so that outward movement. So what I find interesting about this, you know, deeper internal silence or awareness is that when we express ourselves, you know, let's say through song, where does that movement come from? You know, even where does that note come from? You know, you could say that prior to that note, that word of that song being expressed, there was silence, and then there was sort of this energetic introduction into silence, a sound. That sound had a certain duration, and then what happens? Eventually that subsides back into silence. So one of the things I did when Selwyn asked me to talk about this. I went and looked at the dictionary definition of silence, and it said the absence of noise. And my sense is, well, that's not really sufficient, right? It feels like it's more than that. I mean, the entire universe, you know, all of nature, it happens, life happens in silence. And then there's occasionally noise that has a certain duration. Silence is sort of the background, the sort of the ground of being. You know, forest is quiet, tree falls, sound. So it seems like it's something much more significant than just the definition of the absence of noise. Is it really just the absence of noise, or is it of a fundamentally different character? You know, so we can talk about different sounds, different tones, you know, some sounds being louder, higher, softer. You know, all of that can be a comparison, you know, within the same realm. But then there's silence. Silence, it seems like it's of a different character altogether. You can't compare sort of any sound with silence. Seems like they're just of a different character, and yet they're not unrelated either. So one of the other interesting things about silence is, you know, imagine an auditorium, quiet, and then a heavy metals band moves into the auditorium, plays full blast for an hour, and then packs up their instruments and leaves the room. You know, was the silence disturbed by that? Did the silence object to that? Was it annoyed by it? Was it diminished by it in any way? You know, did it have, you know, would it have preferred a different style of music? You know, it doesn't seem to have those attributes, right? You know, also, if you were to do a performance and, you know, maybe you wanted to be accompanied by a piano and you set up the sound system and a microphone. And even though the silence was, you know, very much a part of the song, you didn't have to, you know, set up for silence, right? You didn't have to set up any equipment to make sure that there's, you know, a silence in the room between the notes. You know, it's just, we take it for granted. It's sort of there. It's always present. You know, as soon as that energetic introduction of a sound, which is, you know, sort of an energy generated from a person or an event in nature, you know, that sound is an energetic phenomena that has a certain lifespan and then falls back into silence. Another one, you know, if we live in the city, another one's immediately coming, so there might not ever get to be silence, but each particular thing has this lifespan where it arises, you'd say, out of silence and falls back into silence. So again, going back into this comparison between awareness and silence, we're saying silence doesn't have an opinion, isn't trying to insist that, this sound be preferred over that sound. And awareness is, just our innate awareness also is the same. Our minds certainly prefer this over that. But the awareness itself doesn't. The awareness itself has been present for every moment of your entire life. Good, bad, ugly, everything, right? Completely present, willing to experience that. Again, our mind might not like certain events at all, but the awareness itself was present for it. So both silence and awareness also have this quality of open-heartedness, you could say. I wanted to introduce one other concept from a totally unrelated field that I thought was interesting, and that is the concept of the numeral 0. So 0 is sort of a latecomer to the skill of being able to count things. It was first thought of probably 2,000 years ago back in Mesopotamia, sort of migrated east to China, sort of developed a little greater sophistication there. At first, it was just the absence of a number. That's what it meant. It was a placeholder. It wasn't really a number itself. It was just sort of indicating that normally there'd be a number there, but there's not. And then it sort of migrated back to the Muslim culture back in the 700s. And it wasn't really until 500 years later, 1200 or so, that it became part of Western culture at all. So this idea of something sort of a non-existence out of which things could be counted, but it was like the base, like there was actually the concept of nothing out of which things could be added to it. So in that sense, I see it quite similar to this idea of silence. Silence is sort of potential, of a blank slate, onto which we can sort of introduce sound as a counterpoint. In like Japanese flute music, if you've ever listened to that, I mean, it's really, really sparse. So it's almost as if the flute its primary role is to point back to the silence rather than draw attention to itself. Whereas a lot of times music that's more dense than that, you could say, the attention is drawn to the words, to the notes, to the meaning, etc. But even then, there's still that underlying silence. So if it was just pure noise, right, just nonstop noise, it just wouldn't be very interesting. Our mind would get bored with that. It'd be sort of like listening to, I don't know if you have this over there, but here they have this warning system that interrupts your internet or cell phone with just this annoying single tone, monotone sound. But if there was only that, eventually our mind would just tune it out altogether. So it's really, seems to me, the interplay between this underlying silence and our introduction of and sort of an energetic movement into that space. So one of the things, if we are singing, one of the things that we can notice is that, from where does that movement come from? I'd suggest that this source is really this silence, this inner awareness that is quiet. You could almost say of no particular identifiable substance other than we know that it's real, it's alive, right? There's a sense of aliveness there. But out of that, when we're really coming from that place, we might call it, singing from the heart. Right? We wouldn't call it singing from the head, right? We know what that is too. Where we're trying to do it right, where we're worried about what other people might think. I know when we're learning certain skills, to get the body acclimated to being able to perform, to sing in a certain way. Yeah, sure, mental activity is helpful. But when we're just doing it for our own enjoyment, or whether we've become relaxed enough about our sort of technical abilities that we can allow ourselves to come from that deeper place. When we're coming from a deeper place, it doesn't get filtered through the mental self-reflection loop. You know what I mean by that? Where we sort of look back at ourselves like, well, how am I doing now? That sense, am I doing it right? Should I do it better? What if I mess up? What will other people think about me? Right? You ever go through those sort of mental loops? So the useful thing to know about that is that that's just the mind talking, right? We can just see that, that's what the mind does. When it doesn't have anything better to do, it'll just sort of spew out whatever. It's not bad. It's just what it does. It's sometimes it thinks when it doesn't need to think. But if we try to repress that, like, oh my gosh, maybe if that's true, maybe I am messing up. Maybe other people think badly of me. We can't make those thoughts stop. That's useful to know too. They sort of have the mind of their own. But what we can do is withdraw our belief in them. That's what we do have the power to do. So we can just, let's say we're getting ready to sing, and maybe that sort of thought stream starts up in our head. And we can just say, yep, there it is. But, just don't try to push it away. Just see that it's not actually true. It's not actually where that song is actually arising from, that deeper place. But if we can get in touch with that inner silence, inner awareness, and just allow that to be expressed, we could call that singing wholeheartedly, singing authentically. What tends to be inauthentic is when we try to do it from the head, when we're worried about doing it right. But when we're just doing it out of joy, there's that sense of open-heartedness. There's that sense of, allowing my, whatever you want to call it, inner spirit, awareness, silence, my deeper nature, it doesn't matter what we call it, but we can all sense into that I'm going to allow that to be expressed. right? So we could have, let's say we have two singers, both equally technically skilled, and you know, one singer is singing from, you know, their, you know, focusing on their technical abilities, doing it right, and the other's singing from someplace deeper, even though the notes are the same, sounds are the same, something is conveyed by the singer that's just knows that where that is coming from is deeper than the mind, you know, knows that place in themselves and allows, and is allowing that to be expressed. I mean, sure, the training has to happen. The body has to learn how to do what it has to do. But once those skills are learned at whatever level, how that then is expressed is a freedom, because that silence has the potential. That silence has the potential to express what can't be expressed in, you know, let's say the written word or the spoken word. So the song is really an opportunity to allow that almost free reign, allow that to really be fully expressed, knowing that it's coming from a place that we may not entirely understand ourselves. But it feels intimate. You know, it feels like it's coming from a place deep within us, that has more reality than any self-judgment thoughts or comparison, any of those. So when we can begin to tune into that, it has an entirely different sense about it. So that allows us to express whatever may be there to express. You know, we may not even know what that is until it is expressed. You might even say, well, that's sort of the whole purpose in singing, right? To discover what it is that in that moment wants to be expressed. And if we're are willing to just sort of step out of the way a little bit to trust that that will be there, then there's, you'd say, less interference. You know, the more we try to control it from our mind, to manipulate it, worrying about it, etc., you know, the greater the distortion will be. So we can just see that. And over time, it may be that we begin to trust that more and more, trust that inner space and its ability to communicate something from a deeper place in ourselves, a more authentic place in ourselves, from silence. The silence that we essentially are deep down. You know, so we can just become more and more aware of that. You know, see the mental activity, some useful, some not so. You know, we can see the mind, you know, trying to maintain its supervisor's role. But this, what we're talking about here, isn't really a place for that. We don't need, you know, our mind playing judge and jury. You can just see that sometimes that's useful. In this moment, I've prepared as well as I can, and but I will allow this to flow and see what happens. I mean, that's part of the enjoyment of it, right? Because, you know, prior to the song, we don't know. We don't know how exactly that will be expressed. So that's part of the enjoyment of it. We don't know, and there's this moment of manifestation out of nothing, right? Before you started the song, quiet. And then out of that, something arose from who you truly are. And that in itself has power. That in itself has authenticity if we allow it. Yeah. Okay, I think that's what I had to say. So,
Thank you very much, Don, for your sharing and for your talk. Something that struck me when, reminded me when Don was speaking, and you know, I wrote the blurb for the course. You know, in a sense, silence has been our greatest supporter. It's been at all our performances, kind of good and bad, and it's been there when the voice hasn't maybe worked or the expression hasn't, you know, really maybe been what we felt we were capable of. And it just seems so rich that there's something in there within us that's willing to support us no matter what. And I think the more we are able to sense into that, the more we have the freedom to express ourselves.
I would like to say one other thing. You talked at the outset, Solomon, about listening. And listening is actually a beautiful gift that we can give the other person. You know, most of us don't listen all that well. Someone else is talking, and we're busy trying to figure out what we're going to say next or what we want to say. But just the gift of being present, you know, offering, let's say another person is singing and you're listening, offering that person your silent presence, right? Just being available to the other person without the judgmental mind thing happening. You know, just being present for it. Just that is a gift, and it's also a gift for the person singing. It's a gift both ways, you know, because it allows us to connect to the other person's authenticity too, you know, because we're not coming from it a mind-based opinion, you know, moment by moment about how the other person's doing. You know, we're just there enjoying their expression in that moment. You know? So it's not actually necessary, you know, for us to be critical of it or judgmental of it. We can just give that gift of silent presence. So anyway, I just wanted to add that.